Hey, I'm Di McQueen, licensed clinical social worker, family and addiction expert. I'm here with Dr. Brian Jackson, my longtime cohort who specializes in the field of addiction. Welcome to Healing Families Shattered by Addiction.
Di and I have worked with addicts, alcoholics, and their families for over 30 years combined. Our podcast and coaching programs focus on families who have a loved one suffering from addiction. Our experience has been that this disease affects families as much, if not more, than the addict or alcoholic.
Is your world spinning out of control? Are you codependent? Are you experiencing worry, loss of sleep, and difficulty concentrating? If so, you're in the right place. Brian and I have both personally lived it, learned it, and now we're going to teach you tools and techniques on how to get your life back that you thought was shattered by addiction.
Okay, let's dive in.
Brian and I are so excited to introduce to you our new sponsor, Lakeview Health. They are a wonderful residential treatment center. Whether it's the family member who is looking for a place or the addict or alcoholic themselves, this would be the place that we would refer them to. Brian, you have many years of experience with Lakeview.
Yeah, Lakeview Health is a center of excellent addiction treatment. They take an evidence-based approach, medical approach to treating this complex brain disease. They hold the Joint Commission's Golden Seal, and they were voted one of America's best treatment centers by Newsweek magazine. They deliver dual diagnosis, gender-responsive, and trauma-informed care at their gorgeous facility here in Jacksonville, Florida. But they do see people from all over the world do come here to Jacksonville to go to treatment at Lakeview. Their levels of care include medically supervised detox, which a lot of people do need. Then they stabilize them in a residential rehabilitation and partial hospitalization program. They have board-certified physicians, master-level therapists, and they work to address the unique needs of each patient. So in other words, it's not a cookie-cutter program. They help individuals build skills for long-term sobriety. So if you or someone you know needs treatment, please visit their site at lakeviewhealth.com. We also have a hyperlink on our website at familyandaddictionexperts.com where you can just click and get some information about Lakeview Health. And Di, I think you have a number for people to call if they would like to inquire about treatment.
I sure do. That number is 888-480-3799. That's 888-480-3799. Give them a call. Hey everybody, this is Di McQueen and welcome back to Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. Brian and I are going to talk about different types of addictions that people may have today. And I think it's, always remarkable to people when they start to realize like there are so many different types of addictions. The term addiction really refers to different forms of addictive behaviors. And there's three main types of addictions that we recognize. We recognize that physical addictions, addictions to things like substance abuse, such as nicotine, cocaine, alcohol, opioids, etc. We physically have to have that. Then, of course, there's our behavioral addictions, which is our compulsive need to engage in this type of behavior, such as sex, work, eating junk food, exercise. That's more of a behavioral type of situation, and we actually, become addicted. And then lastly, things that are impulse control disorders, and those are the inability to control our emotions and the urges that affect other people's well-being, such as kleptomania, pyromania, gambling, and, emotional outbursts. So Brian, I thought it would be kind of interesting to kind of break those down a little bit for you, and so that you could understand, how these different types of addictions affect people, in our working society and in our general way of life, right? So first, I just want to say that addictions are, a consistent urge to repeat certain behaviors, knowing that they cause harm. They spend lots of money, time trying to support this problem, and treatment usually must include some type of therapy or other forms of maybe a rehab or etc. So, Dr. B, why don't you kind of fill us in a little bit on physical addictions and, help people understand a little bit about what exactly does that mean, physical addiction, and what are we talking about?
Well, first of all, hi, Di, and I'm glad you're getting over your cold. But and it was brave of you to get on, not sounding like yourself, but I appreciate it. You're like, we got to do this podcast. But
Yes, old
we're
clonhead.
happy to be here today, and of course, we're Family and Addiction Experts is the name of our company, and some things stand out as obvious. When people hear Family and Addiction Experts, they think about and rightfully so, alcohol and other substances of choice that people may use or may be addicted to. So the obvious ones, I think, to everybody are, alcohol being number one, but there's also tobacco addictions. Opioids is something that we're really seeing a lot of in society today, and the opioids could be anything from heroin to fentanyl to prescribed prescription medications. And for those that have pain, legitimate pain that start out getting prescribed opioids through no fault of their own, they can become addicted to the euphoria, associated with that. And then we also talk about prescription drug addiction. So sometimes we think when we're getting prescribed a medication that it's okay, but we see a lot of benzodiazepines, which is, Xanax, Valium, Klonopin. They may be prescribed for an anxiety disorder, but they're very difficult to just stop taking. Matter of fact, we highly recommend that you don't. So, that needs to be supervised by your physician in terms of titrating down off of that. But I'll just kind of roll through some other things that might be addictions that people suffer from that are not as common as others. And inhalants addiction, where people are huffing paint or huffing Freon. I know that sounds bizarre to some people, but it is an addiction. Amphetamine addiction, that comes in the form of methamphetamines. We see a lot of that. Cocaine addiction is very, very common. It used to be, it was powder cocaine. Now there's crack cocaine. So that is another common addiction. Hallucinogens is another type of addiction, and those would be things like using Ambien during the day. Ambien is made to put you to, to help you with sleep, but some people abuse that during the day. So I just basically wanted to talk about how quickly you can get addicted to some of these substances, methamphetamine, crack cocaine, things of that nature, and especially opioids. You can become addicted, if you're looking at a scale, very quickly to those medications or substances. And therefore, it needs to be addressed quickly before it progresses to where you have a lot of consequences physically as a result of that. Alcohol and tobacco and marijuana. The scale is a little bit longer for that. Typically people start out drinking a certain amount, and then it progresses and progresses until it becomes a problem. When I say people who have a predisposition to this disease and this illness. And we need to remember that family members who have these addictions are not bad people trying to become good people. They have an illness, and we want them to get well and stay well. Now, do they do bad things when they're under the influence? Sometimes, yes. And some of them are very bizarre when we look at them, as family members. So addiction takes all shapes and sizes. I'll take a family history and say, were there any alcoholics in your family on the paternal or maternal side? And people will say no. And I'll say, were there any other addictions? Oh, yeah, my mom was addicted to pills, or my dad was a gambler. So addiction is addiction. And I think people use to get the euphoria associated with that to self-medicate in a lot of cases away from some, comorbidities in terms of mental health stuff, like anxiety, depression, etc. But I'm going to let Di talk about the behavioral addictions. And I think you'll find a common thread throughout these in terms of escape. But I'm going to let Di talk about some of the behavioral addictions. And
Thank
Yeah,
you for that.
and thank you so much because remembering that there are so many different addictions, and you and I pretty much specialize in the substances, but we also do deal with, and especially you on the gambling side of things, and but it is important that a lot of times there are as you said, comorbidities going on. So a behavioral addiction is really not the substance abuse anymore, but it's a compulsive need to continue certain behaviors, even though some of these have consequences. For instance, um, again, we're talking about sex addiction. I mean, that can get in the way of a lot of things, marriages, for instance, or even just life in general. Food addictions become a really big one, and work, exercise, anything to that extreme is obviously we're trying to stay away from something that we're trying to not feel. So we're filling a hole for some particular reason. And these are usually the ones where we really have an underlying mental health condition, or life stress is just getting too out of control, so we need to do something to, in our minds and to our brains, feel something different, right? Ultimately, these things can in fact change our brains, and we have to do some work to get those back. And a lot of times in these cases, even though it's not a physical manifestation, it is something that emotionally we are tied to. And therefore, again, we need some form of treatment. And oftentimes it's not just us, being able to give them, therapy and techniques. Sometimes it's trauma related. And so due to a trauma, we need to do something to, escape this need. But sometimes we have to start in a facility and then work our way back to, working with people like you and I, on a consistent basis. These types of behaviors can really get, and the cool part about behaviors is that really can be changed, with some work. If we have a behavior, we are totally in control of making modifications to our behaviors and make our lives what we need them to be. We first have to recognize that we're doing that. And a lot of times by doing compulsive behaviors, most of us don't really recognize that that's what we're doing and that there's something that we can do to change that until we become aware. So, you and I help people become aware of what they're doing. And once they recognize it, then we take steps, sometimes from a cognitive standpoint, and other times, there's some other tools and techniques that we use to try to help people work through some of those and the reasons why they're doing it. So if they can learn how to handle, quote unquote, or cope with whatever it is that they aren't able to do, we can untie and sort of put back in place things that are much more in line with healthy behaviors in life. So I think that's really important that people understand that the cool part about behavioral stuff is it's pretty easily changed if you can identify and realize that that's what's going on. So I don't know, B, do you think we should talk about any of those specifically? I think people kind of get the gist of what we mean by that, right?
Yeah, I think so, because I think people use alcohol, drugs, or, get impulsive or have some behavioral addictions to escape the way they feel. We talk about this being an inside job. People that are at the refrigerator at 2 o'clock in the morning eating are not eating because they're hungry. They're eating because they're empty. And when I say empty, maybe emotionally. So looking outside of themselves, for a goodie to make them feel better, which kind of brings me back to sugar addiction, because it's something that I've struggled with without really understanding why. My wife would make 20 cookies and come in and 15 of them were gone. But sugar is another one that's really not on here, because of the dopamine goodie you get from the sugar. Then your blood sugar drops, and then your blood sugar drops, so we go get some more sugar. So balance with that. So that's something that we need to be aware of in terms of sugar intake, because they say, or I've read research, that it is as addictive as cocaine. So just because you eat sugar, that doesn't mean you're a cocaine addict. But I'm just saying that, this is all about balance. But I think once we're aware of some of these things, instead of like going, why did I eat all those cookies? Well, I ate them all because I was craving them, and my blood sugar was dropping, and then it was stabilizing. So I'm jumping around a little bit on that. I don't know why I got sidetracked, but I think
But
you
it's a
must.
really great point. I mean, it really is. And you and I know we went from sort of the physical substances, and then we move into some, and this is very normal for most people, right? Where they go from one behavioral thing to another. So you go physically, then we move into our other addictions, and we trade a lot of addictions until we become very aware of. And I mean, we make jokes all the time about my workaholism, and you and I both are, the exercise people, and we've learned to do a better balance. I mean, it's always a challenge for those types of things, but it is something that both of us are keenly aware of, and we work on a daily basis. But we also understand usually what we're trying to avoid, right? And that's the difference today, which is, years ago, I had no idea what it was that I was trying to, like, wasn't happening. And today, I usually know that I'm trying to avoid something. And then I have someone who's wonderful like you who says, Di, what are you doing? You seem a little out of balance. And so we can, call accountability out there as well. But let's move into just, for a quickie on this one, because I know you have such a great expertise in the gambling arena. What is an impulse control disorder? And that's when a person experiences difficulty controlling their behavior or emotion. So a little different that they're trying to cover up or fill a hole. This one is they have it so much that they can't control what they're doing, right? And they can't stop repeating this behavior. And it's impulsive, like it just happens, right? Like kleptomania, gambling, again, the pyromaniac type of behaviors that once it starts, it's kind of like they get their goodie from that too. But once it starts the wheels in motion, it can't stop until it's happened, right? And so those are usually, the disorder is usually kind of unclear on how it begins, but it usually starts from those factors of, such as their physical, biological, and environmental upbringing, right? That changes something inside has happened, where they came from, maybe something that's gone on in their physical being as it is, and their biological nature that causes something, where they can't control that. They never learned impulse control. And that usually stems from our early development. And so, this is, a much more neurological type of disorder than it is, a behavioral or physical. But, maybe you can delve into the gambling part of this a little bit and help people understand a little bit more about, that impulse part of things.
Well, I mean, there's the gambling addiction that people who are gamblers, who were, that was their thing. But I'll flip back to that, in terms of like addiction to a substance and alcohol. When people get into recovery, our fear always, and we see it a lot, is people changing their behavior to other things that are not good for them or for the people around them. And so if you think about the physical addiction and mental obsession associated with substances, you stop those substances, and the next thing you know, I call it switching chairs on the Titanic. You're either overeating, you're gambling, you're looking at pornography, which is readily accessible now, to get that dopamine goodie. And so with gambling, it's interesting. The part of the brain that it affects is almost, it does mimic what a lot of substances do in terms of giving you that dopamine release. The difference with gambling, it's pretty evident and obvious to people. If they have an alcohol or drug problem, the family members can see it. But with gambling, people can do that without really being noticed by the family members. I had a couple that came in after 25 years of marriage, and the husband said to the wife, I have something to tell you. We're getting ready to get foreclosed on the house, and have you spent the kids college funds? And she almost fell out of the chair, and it had everything to do with gambling. So gambling is something that can be hidden. And the but the thing about gambling is people recover from the pain of it very quickly, as opposed to alcohol and or drugs. They can really lose a lot of money, in a casino or gambling on whatever they're doing, and wake up the next morning and say, okay, I'm going to go back and get this back. So it really is an escape. we live in a naval town, a military town, and there was a period of time where I was seeing a lot of wives whose husbands were shipped out to sea, and they were playing slot machines, and that became their relationship was with the slot machine, the goodies that they were getting from that. So all the reasons that people gamble are all over the place, but at the end of the day, there's really no upside to it. So it is an escape, very similar to drugs and alcohol. And I don't know, I mean, there's a lot more to the gambling and the part of the brain that gets hijacked and the dopamine goodie that you get from it. But in any event, there's a lot more sneaking and secretive stuff that has to go on to be able to facilitate that addiction. And it's less obvious to the family members than somebody who was impaired on alcohol and or drugs.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that most people, when you start to realize addictive behaviors, right, it is those things where you start to find yourself lying about things, right, sneaking around, putting the chocolate bar in your closet or things like that, where you start to go like, why am I not just being open and honest about this? Which means, there's shame involved. We have a lot of characteristics. Obviously, we know that most of us on the physical side of things, those are the most dangerous to us as far as our physical body. But these other things are equally and can be, really detrimental to our well-being. You mentioned it, but, a food disorder, you can get lots of health concerns from that as well. Gambling, sex, pornography, all those things. We can spend a ton of money on these things and put the family into financial ruins. So, I mean, most things when they are lopsided and we get to a point where things are, really in the extreme, they've put us in a place where we need to find, better balance and moderation. And that's really where it comes down to is really, seeking help. People always say to us all the time, right? Like, is there a cookie cutter to get through this? And we're like, no. I wish we could say it was that easy, but there are certain things that we do and techniques that we use. But the good news is there's always help available, correct? So, whether it's from a detox substance or what have you, where we need to start that process by detoxing, we still need to get into some behavioral types of therapies in most cases and sort of deal with whatever, the situation is that's causing. Where does the hole come from that we're trying to fill? And how do we, work through some of these impulsiveness? How do we teach people impulse control? So again, each person is slightly different. And, you and I both, I think, feel very strongly that there's not one approach to how we manage people. But once we understand that person, we're much more able to help them navigate and work on different tools and techniques to be able to help them, get through. But I don't think most people can do it without some form of help. And so we always encourage people to reach out and get that help that they need so that they can have the life they've always wanted. I don't believe anybody's hopeless. Do you?
No, and the common thread that runs through the physical, behavioral, and impulse addictions is that you have to keep secrets. And, we say this all the time, if you have to keep a secret, don't do it. And behind that is, if I have a secret, how can my communication intimacy, let's say with my wife, be if I'm looking at pornography or I'm gambling or I'm, doing other impulsive behaviors, because I don't want the magnifying glass on me. But when I say communication intimacy, it's not only with your loved ones, but the communication intimacy with yourself. Because obviously, if you're keeping a secret, you're being self-critical of yourself. It's taken a lot of time and energy to hide whether it's behavioral, impulsive, or physical addiction. And to your point, unless you ask for help, you can't get help. And, addiction recovery is an inside job. So if we can get to the place where you're comfortable being comfortable with yourself, that's a great place to be. These other addictions, impulsive, behavioral, or physical, are indications that you are not comfortable with yourself, that you are looking outside of yourself to get some sort of quote unquote joy, satisfaction. But unfortunately, it's at the detriment to yourself and for those people that love you. So, the good news is you're right. All you got to do is ask for help and have some willingness to get some help. And then from there, the process I don't want to say it's easy, but now you're starting to see things that start to make sense to you in terms of, hey, maybe this is not good for me. Maybe this is something that I need to address and maybe figure out how to live my life without these behaviors, without these addictions, and give yourself a chance to enjoy life sober. And when I say sober, I don't mean just the chemicals, but sober from impulsive and behavioral addictions.
Totally agree. I think the last thing in closing that kind of, what gets us out of that shame guilt cycle that we tend to live in when we are doing, extremes and addictive behaviors. As you stated, we're never doing anything sort of authentically. So there's a lot of guilt and shame associated. And, it keeps us on edge at all times. And you know what? The good news is you don't have to live your life that way. And there's help out there. And we're one of them. So give us a call or, email us or, drop us a line or something. And we'll be happy to give you help. We're at familyandaddictionexperts.com. And we'd love to hear from you. B, anything else you'd like to tell them about?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, again, there's no hopelessness in terms of the person that's suffering, but also for family members. I think we get it affects the entire family. So, I mean, shoot us an email if you have a question. Obviously we think we're good, but we don't cover everything in all these podcasts. And there may be some things we left out, or there may be some things that we raised that you have more questions about. So you can get a hold of us at info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. We also have resources for the family on our website that they're in PDF files that you can download and print for yourself to review. And as far as our website, sometimes you got to put the www.familyandaddictionexperts.com because obviously there's a lot of facilities out there with treatment. But I think that's the easiest way to get to us. And I think this has been a really good conversation, especially about the things that are not as obvious, which is the behavioral and impulsive addictions. We all know about substance abuse addictions and how that affects the family and how obvious that is to us. But there's other behaviors that, might need to be addressed or need to be addressed if you're engaging in those.
Absolutely. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to our next podcast, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Again, we're always available for you. And you're right, B, that www.familyandaddictionexperts.com is extremely important. As always, it's great to partner up with you, my dear friend. And I wish you a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thanks, Dia. Same to you.
All right. Thanks so much for joining our podcast, Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more important tools, techniques, and ways for you to focus on you instead of the alcoholic or addict in your world.
Until then, please go to our website, familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's familyandaddictionexperts.com. You'll also see links to our Facebook and Instagram pages. Please also, if you have any emails that you would like to send us, that's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. With any thoughts, feelings, questions that you may have for us, we would love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.